Some people actually believe that suffering and intense agony are signs of spiritual ascension. Some also believe that seeing colors and saints in meditation, experiencing aliens or extraterrestrial beings, and even making a fortune, such as millions and billions of dollars as a result of meditation, mean that they are in spiritual ascension. I will shed some light on the relevance of these, if any, on the evolution of your consciousness and what determines spiritual progress, a heightened state of consciousness. Let us look first now at inner suffering, what this really means. Well, inner suffering is an indicator that you are stuck in your mind with defeating thoughts and emotions because you're strongly identified with some unpleasant or difficult event or situation in your life. You cannot cope, you cannot manage, so you suffer mentally and emotionally. Now, I'm not saying that you're not justified in feeling your inner pain, because we all go through some of this. And also, there are many people who go through very horrific experiences of abuse and violence, and this is not easy to undergo or to go beyond. But recognize that as long as there is prolonged inner suffering, there is a level of ignorance, such as unforgiveness. And often, what happens is an unfortunate event or situation may be over, but it remains negatively in your memory. And this results in prolonged suffering. And as long as there is ignorance, there is darkness. And as long as there is darkness, there is no light of consciousness. As such, suffering or intense agony are actually not signs of spiritual ascension or progress. It is not even a sign of awakening, because spiritual ascension and awakening actually requires some kind of light of awareness, light of understanding, of gaining wisdom. But what suffering is, it is a pathway. It presents you with the opportunity to wake up, to go beyond the suffering in order to ascend. Waking up is the realization of what you're doing to yourself, the agony that you are perpetuating in yourself and even in others, which you pass on to others. So the event may be over, but you are still living in memory and still hoarding your anger, your bitterness, resentment, disappointment, and guilt. And when you truly realize how you are harboring all these negative feelings in you, and you are creating suffering in you, it means that you are actually waking up. You are awakening. Spiritual ascension is when you start acting upon this realization to improve your state of being. It is from here that you can begin to disidentify from the defeating thoughts, memories, and emotions. And this is what will give rise to forgiveness. We're being in a position to wish others well, to be good to yourself, no matter what. It is what enables you to leave the past behind, the past negative situation or event, and to be able to move forward with wisdom and a level of freedom within. So, if you experience aliens and extraterrestrial beings or different colors, or even divine beings, such as in meditation, is this really a sign of spiritual ascension? Well, these experiences are simply they're just a sideshow. And what they're meant to do is to lure you on the spiritual path, to give you encouragement to keep going. They are like little rewards as you go on the spiritual path. And they're really there to show you that another reality exists other than this one that you're so familiar and strongly identified with as the only reality you know, this world in which you live. So seeing an apparition of a divine or sacred being, such as Christ, the Virgin Mary, Lord Shiva, or Buddha, this is really to reveal to you that another dimension exists, not just this solid world that you perceive. And these experiences, they're like the bait to draw you into a more divine and quiet state within, to stir on your transformation the way you think, in the words you speak, in your deeds, your attitudes, and your behaviors toward others. But what tends to happen to many people who have these experiences is that they end up getting stuck and identified with them, and they do not transform inwardly. They do not become a better human being. Instead, what they do is that they go about talking about these wonderful experiences, so they become attached to them, and they perpetuate bad deeds, bad intentions. They even behave like a jerk toward others, and there is no effort to change. And this is therefore a clear sign of a lack of spiritual ascension. Now, if this is you, then all you had was an experience of a different dimension or a different reality that you are now making a big deal over. So you've become egotistical, thinking that you're better than others, you're above others. I am deep. Look what I was able to experience. You know, ancient spiritual masters actually warned spiritual aspirants that if they got stuck and identified with these experiences, these experiences become the very hindrances to their spiritual progress and evolution. When you come out of these experiences, when you have them and you come out into the world, into the everyday humdrum of life, how these translate into your state of being to reflect out of you, the way you impact others, if these are done in a sacred way, in a more divine and heightened way, then this is spiritual ascension. The experience is really there to wake you up to a divine reality. Your elevating transformation is the ascension. Now, if you never prayed before in your life and you started praying, if you never had some connection with God or some divine power and you started on that path now, do not give up, because this is actually a sign that you are making some level of spiritual progress. So don't get discouraged, okay? Now, if you started meditating and praying and you end up building some empire of millions and billions of dollars, what this reflects is that you were able to access certain possibilities that have now become a reality for you. They're not necessarily a reflection of some spiritual ascension. And I'm making this very clear because I've noticed that this is being sold as spiritual ascension in our world today, some level of heightened consciousness. You know, Jesus, St. Francis of Assisi, Lord Shiva, they were not multi-millionaires or billionaires. And I'm not suggesting that you cannot make your millions and billions or build your empire, but your intention behind these, how you use these to transform and evolve in nature, and how you use these for the betterment of the whole society, of the world, these are what will determine your spiritual progress and ascension, not the ability to make money or millions or build an empire. Saint Francis himself abandoned fortunes. He came from a rich family, and he abandoned his fortunes because he saw that this was of the flesh, and the temptations and wrongdoings that can come out of them when you acquire too much. They can cause you to descend due to greed and selfishness. if you're not very careful. And he saw this in his father. So this is why he abandoned it. There was a great yogi from India that came to the West here. His name is Paramahansa Yogananda, and he often advised to stop running after worldly pleasures because they are trappings to your spiritual evolution. And I'm not saying that you cannot enjoy what's you are blessed with, but is to be very careful not to be centered out there, but to be centered within. And for those of you who are not wealthy and don't have much, don't worry. Let me tell you this. You too, by having too little, this too can cause you to descend, as you may actually do wrong things and behave badly towards others just to survive. So it is not about how much you have or how little you have. It is about your state of being and how you change inwardly. So you can go ahead and have your wealth, which may actually tempt you less to do wrong in order to have. How you use that fortune that you amass is what was going to determine your spiritual ascension. Do you give with no expectation of return? Do you look around within your own family to see who are suffering and need help? Are you reaching out and helping them, or are you judging them and keep pushing them down? Reach out to those close to you, friends, others in society who may need help, and how you expand that, how you amass your fortune and use that to actually build spiritual communities for meditation, to become, to inspire spiritual evolution. Do you encourage sacred togetherness? What are your intentions? How pure are your thoughts behind your actions? How caring you become, how you deal with others, how you are affecting and infecting this planet Earth, the imprint you're leaving behind, how sacred it is, how honest and fair you are in acquiring your mass or your little wealth or whatever little you have. And we're all work in progress in all of this. How humble you are. Are you bragging about the fortunes you were able to make? Do you give recognition for a greater power that have brought this into being for you? So, if ever you want to know how you are doing spiritually, if you are actually in spiritual ascension and in some heightened state of consciousness, I would say, I challenge you to do this. Go place yourself continuously amongst people who are in opposition to you in nature, those who are opposed to you and to you, even to your higher level ideas and qualities, those who do not like you and whom you do not like. And don't do this just for a few days or for a week. But some of you, that's all you need, and you would realize very quickly how you're doing spiritually. I would say challenge yourself. Those of you, especially who like to walk around like this and think you're above it all, you go and place yourself among this class of people, this group of people, not just for a few days or weeks, for months. Try it for a year or a few years, and go and serve and be good to the lowliest of the low. And I don't mean the poor and underprivileged. I mean the ones who are unmanly, the falsely entitled, the ingratuitous ones, those who do not value what they get from others, and the disrespectful. And I can assure you that you will find your answer very quickly as to whether or not you are progressing spiritually. Just look at how you start to deal with them, how your state of being starts to change negatively. You see, I can speak from experience because I was challenged in this area, and I can tell you, I failed over and over until I had to learn how to deal with this category of people sternly, as the situation required, but without malice, ill thoughts in me, or judgment or negative feelings toward these people, no matter how they may have interpreted my stern actions. What was important was to change my inner state of being and for me not to be disrespectful to them. And this was my test, and it will be your test also. And that is what is going to tell you how you are changing is going to be the answer you get with regard to your spiritual progress. And you have to pass that test in order to be promoted. One of my spiritual teachers told us that it is very difficult to help or be good to those who are better than you, or from whom you cannot receive any benefit. And when you can do this, you ascend spiritually. But this was not my challenge. Actually, at least not as yet. I don't know if one day down the road I'm going to be challenged and struggle with it. But it was very easy for me to give to those who are better than me, or to someone who I cannot receive any benefit from. What was also easy was to be good to anyone who was less fortunate than myself, or to anyone on par with me. My challenge was really from the category of people who were unmannerly, disrespectful, who hated me and thought I was a snob because I had a certain kind of etiquette about me. And I can tell you, I felt as though I failed, I backslided. I had to learn to transform my inner state of being toward them, even though I may have had to deal with them outwardly stern at times. And I had to do this because I had to draw boundaries, because I am a lady. So you may find yourself in that situation, so pay very close attention to it and how you are transforming. Now let us look at signs of spiritual ascension so we can master it. One of the ancient texts of India, called the Bhagavad Gita, addresses this topic in a simple way based on three modes of what is called prakriti. And that's just the Sanskrit word for a simple translation, nature. And there are three gunas or qualities, our nature. And the lowest nature is called tamasic, and it's based on the principle of inertia and inactivity, darkness, where people remain a bit unchanged. And then above that, you progress to what is called a rajasic nature quality, which is the principle of activity, action. There's continuous action, there's change, and there's movement. And there's a quality, or guna it is called in Sanskrit, called sattvic, which is of a purer nature. It's a quality of goodness where you find the person is very serene, harmonious, well balanced in mind and attitude. And I will explain these qualities under I'll explain the qualities under each of these gunas to help you determine whether or not you are progressing spiritually and to what degree. Now, the tamasic, or lower nature, you'd find people of a tamasic nature, they are highly identified with their body. They see it as being them. So they're deluded by its needs, and they live in darkness and ignorance. And a tamasic nature binds the soul through error, sloth, and sleep. One who is tamasic in nature is very evil-minded, and they cling to fear, anxiety, sorrow, depression, and vanity. And you would find that their wisdom is clouded. And they are very much engaged in a lot of sensory pleasures, lust, anger. They're hoarders of money, objects, and disinclination to one's obligatory duties. So you'd probably find people who are in prostitution, who are maybe pimps, even lower than that. And the fruit of tamasic actions is really ignorance. And the reason the fruit is ignorance is because everything about them comes from ignorance. They have no respect for divine activities or divine beings. No food is shared with others, offered in thanksgiving. There are no sacred chants they don't make donations, they don't have faith, and if they worship anything, it will be of a very lower nature, spirits of the dead and ghosts, and therefore their prayer or sacrifice has no avail here or hereafter. And this is according to the ancient text of India. And the kind of foods they eat also are based on impure foods, and they indulge a lot in alcohol and drugs. Their intellect is such that they don't know Adharma versus Dharma, which are the Sanskrit words for Adharma. They do not know wrong versus right. And therefore, they do not have any right power of discrimination. They cannot discriminate versus right versus wrong. They see it all as one, good versus bad. They have this all mixed up. Okay? The next level, so you can determine which quality you are more geared towards. And the next step up, if you want to call it up, or shift, is from tamasic to rajasic. And rajasic nature is one of passion and attachment. And we have much of that today. We have lots of passionate people, but also very attached to whatever it is they do. And this binds the soul through attachment to action and their fruit. They seek reward for their actions. They're attached to their possessions and worldly enjoyment and objects. And they even clutch to their virtues. So when they start to become virtuous, they become identified with it, looking as though they're above others. So they become egotistical. So rajasic nature drives one to action, and you would find these people can become greedy too, and they might engage in activities that promote and support greed. Their action is usually with an interested motive and tend to lack selflessness. So they might do good, which is very good because it's a step up from being tamasic. So if you were tamasic and you're drifting here, know you are progressing. But they also become very restless because they always have to be engaged in something outwardly. There's a thirst for enjoyment, for pleasure, for worldly pleasures. So the fruit of rajasic action, which is dominant in most of us these days, is sorrow. Okay? Because anything you're attached to, whether it's worldly or even divine, can bring you sorrow. They pray, they worship forms of God, just as for example, such as Jesus Christ and Virgin Mary, Lord Shiva, Buddha. And sometimes they can even do this for show, to show others, oh, this is what my nature is, this is what I'm now engaged in. And whatever they do in terms of their prayer and sacrifice is they have an eye to a fruit of this prayer and sacrifice that they're making. So their prayer and sacrifice are performed for the sake of honor and worship, for selfish gain, and they may even pray and worship for the gain of others. So really and truly what they gain is momentary fruit. The foods they eat are a step up from the tamasic people. It may be very spicy. They're still trapped in that place where they eat a lot of spicy food and food that can bring suffering and grief and illness. But their intellect is better than the tamasic in terms of they know the difference between adharma and dharma, which is wrong versus right, but they still struggle to do all things right at all times, and many of us are still in that stage. But know that if you shifted from a tamasic nature to a rajasic nature, that you are improving and progressing, and the key is to keep looking at oneself, to shift more and more away now from the rajasic nature to a sattvic nature, which is pure, means pure in nature. And we see these often in divine souls today. We see them especially in people such as yogis. They tend to have an immaculate, an illuminating, flawless nature, but they abound through identification with their own inner joy and wisdom. You would find Sattvic people are ones who can control their mind and their vital ears and senses through sacred activities such as meditation and self-awareness. So Sattvic nature drives one to joy, and you would find them very much engaged in selfless activities and noble deeds for the betterment of society. It is not all about them. Whatever they do is for the benefit of the whole, which is so beautiful. And it is said that when one dies with a sattvic nature, one obtains the stainless, ethereal world such as heaven. And the fruit of sattvic nature is joy, wisdom, detachment, and inner freedom. So notice what they're saying. It is when you have a pure nature, that is when you attain heaven. And I'm quoting here from the ancient text of India. For many of you who may have a Christian background, let me quote it also from the Bible. So you would see that both match. Okay? So here in the Holy Bible, it says in Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, it says, Jesus says this, not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. So in other words, those of you who feel that you say, oh, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, it guarantees you an automatic entry into heaven. No, it doesn't. Jesus is saying it here himself. He says, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. And this is what he goes to say in verse 20. Jesus says, wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. And what are the fruits of a sattvic or pure nature? Inner joy, inner wisdom, detachment, selflessness, inner freedom. So this is what will get you to heaven. So don't think when we say, oh, we accept God into our life, we have automatic entry. No, we have to change our nature, our state of being, and how this translates into all our actions. Sattvic or pure people, you would find them very much engaged in the worship of God, in coming to know, wanting to know or coming to know the ultimate reality. They're involved in prayer and sacrifice, not for selfish gains, but for the gain of whole of humanity, for their transformation, to elevate the vibration of this world. They believe and understand the need for still doing these as being of a higher nature. So their activities have shifted from lower nature, tamasic, to rajasic, to a pure nature. They do these activities because it is divine in nature. And the foods they eat, you would find them eating more fresh foods and more bland in nature. Foods that promote longevity, intelligence, vitality, and happiness. Not spicy foods that irritate and can agitate the inner being. And their intellect, they know right versus wrong. They know the difference between Dharma and Adharma, and they do right at all times. They know the difference between fear and fearlessness, and they become fearless. They know the difference between bondage and inner freedom, and they become liberated in themselves. So how to determine if you are progressing? You're in spiritual ascension, and you get to decide that. Don't wait for others to tell you that, okay? Because there are many out there who love to point this out, and they're not looking within themselves. You sit with yourself and you watch yourself and determine that. Well, one thing, first of all, when you meet someone of a tamasic or dark or lower nature, plant at least a good word in them. Someone who is a druggie, who is a prostitute maybe, they are in ignorance and they cannot help themselves because they're in ignorance. Their fruit is going to be ignorance. But if you plant a word, a good word, a kind deed, you elevate their, give them something of wisdom to elevate their mind a little bit, then you are progressing and you are helping them to progress because on their own they can't do it. And I know I was challenged with that because I grew up in a way, and I remember when I came to Canada to live, I was told by someone that I grew up very sheltered. I never knew what a prostitute was like, what they looked like, or what people were like in terms of, drug users and pot users. I didn't know any of these things. And I was challenged when I had to face these. But I became very compassionate and I started to look at a blessing in my life in terms of how I was brought up. Now, I'm no perfect human being, but you would see many gurus and preachers and pastors who go out there on the field. I call it the field, where they go out and help people who have gone to prison, who have committed wrong, because they were all living in ignorance. They grew up not in good environments, and they're helping people. So you are progressing and you are helping others to progress also. Okay, so instead of living in a judgmental way, you are living in a more compassionate way to help these people. And I think this is such a beautiful thing to do. And do that without expecting a change in them. Do it because it's who you are, it's natural within you, and it's a good deed to perform. What the second thing I would say is watch very closely which guna or quality you're in and how you're drifting between each of these. There are some who are engaged in meditation, so they're engaged in a sattvic or pure activity. But on the other hand, they're still consuming alcohol, drugs, and pot, so they're being pulled to a divine nature or pure nature, but then they're pulled on the other side with a lower nature. And when you are being tugging and pulling, what is happening? You are just staying one place. You're not really getting to the purer nature that you want to get to. Okay? So you have to become aware of this tugging and pulling and how you're trying to get to the pure nature and evolve. You're engaged in meditation, but you have another one that is pulling you in the opposite direction. And when you become aware of this, you ask yourself, how is that lower nature helping me to progress? And you would see with that tug and pull, you're still planted in one place. You're not progressing as much. So when you become aware of how it is dragging you down, you would eventually let go. You'd find it easy to let go and you would move more and more into that pure activity or sattvic state. The third thing to do is examine your interests and your type of activities in which you're engaged and the degree to which you're engaged. You would lean more to that divine qualities, activities such as the meditation, rather than consuming the alcohol and the drugs that you feel you need to be sustained by in this world. And when you let go of that, you're going to find that a meditative, prayerful activity is what will keep you better sustained and more stable within. Look at the type of company you keep. Are you more in the company of those who are engaged in spiritual activities, spiritual teachers, gurus, fellow meditators, right? Because they're going to be your great influencers. If you are still engaged with people at your level, then you're not going to move very far up. You're going to, because that's your comfort zone. Get out of that comfort zone and place yourself in the midst of spiritual influences. Okay? Look at the intentions and motives behind your actions. Are they still self-serving, or are they more open and more selfless? Are they getting more and more selfless? Look at the kind of knowledge that you're acquiring. Is it higher knowledge? How are you applying that knowledge and turning it into wisdom so it becomes experiential and not just being a hoarder of knowledge? Fourth one, I would say, look at right versus wrong more closely in your life. And we're all challenged by this. And you're going to have to become courageous enough to choose the right versus the wrong at the risk of losing things of the flesh, as it's called in the Bible, in order to gain entry into heaven. So you may lose much out here because of choosing right, but there's a lot to gain within. In your conscience, you'll have a clear and clean conscience, and therefore a heavenly state of being that will grant you the right entry or the right passage into heaven. The fifth one, are you becoming free now from hate and desires, lust and anger and attachment? If you still have desires, at least are they evolving in nature? You know, some of us, we desire to have a big house, and yes, we need money to survive in this world. We need resources, and you may have that desire. But are these desires now evolving? You're now having more divine desires. You want to know who you are, really are, beyond this body, mind, and senses. Desire for more divine activities, divine things in nature, and therefore less bondage to things of the world, things of the flesh. The sixth one, are you changing in your state of being? Are you becoming more peaceful? You can let go and surrender. Are you becoming more pleasant within and outwardly toward others? Are you suffering less? Are you changing the level of thinking in your speech, in your actions, in your behaviors and attitudes? Seventh one, how are you transforming under pressure? Are you like a pressure cooker? When the pressure goes on, you blow up a steam, okay, and you make noise? Or are you keeping battles going? Are you waiting for others to change so you could be happy, or are you changing? Are you the one transforming within? Okay. Eighth one, are you, and this is a very important one, are you a better human being today than you were yesterday, or a month ago, or a year ago, or 5 years ago? Have you backslided? I have gone through that, and I never thought I would. I thought I would keep improving, but I went through a very difficult and challenging situation in my life where I felt I backslided. I couldn't even meditate at times, and I felt I had lost who I was. And that situation that set me up to show me that I was backsliding. Instead of being stuck there, I'll tell you, if you find yourself in that situation, don't remain stuck in backsliding. Notice the change that is occurring in you. And that backsliding is important because many of us have negative stuff stored up in us that we never paid attention to or didn't even realize that was in us. And they come to the surface so that they're there, not for us to stay stuck there, but for us to become aware of them, aware of us, not what's happening out there, but aware of the change, what is happening in us. Because this, when we become aware, then we can make earnest and conscious effort to improve. And how we learn and the kind of wisdom we gain through that moment or moments when we're backsliding, how we apply that wisdom and transform in an elevating way, this is a reflection of our spiritual growth. So let me conclude now. I leave you now with this. The purpose of your existence here on earth is not just to acquire things and to achieve and attain and fulfill dreams and desires. They are there for you to evolve through them, to ascend consciously, not to stay at one level, to shift from a tamasic or dark nature to a rajasic or higher nature, and eventually to a sattvic or purer nature. And there is an even higher nature than sattvic, because eventually you have to become free from that inner joy and wisdom to realize who you are beyond this mind, body, senses, that there's something greater. But we're not going to get deep into that now, because most of you who are watching this are still work in progress. We're still trying to become a little more balanced in one to move on to the other, because often we find ourselves crossing each of these. So we're all work in progress, and advise you to be gentle with yourself, but have the aspiration to ascend from one nature to the other. Self-awareness and earnestness are the keys that are going to help you to make the transformation needed for your spiritual progress and ascension. And your transformed state of being is going to be the clue or the sign of your transformation and how this translates into action in your everyday life, how even-minded you become from praise and criticism, from approval or disapproval. And at this point, I want to invite you to get a copy of my book, Insights, a Life Companion. It's available on Amazon. And the reason I encourage you to get this is because it would certainly help you to become a little more even-minded, to go beyond criticism and disapproval and approval and praise. The Holy Bible, just to remind you, in Matthew chapter 7, verse 20, remember always that Jesus said, "Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them." So remember that all the time. The ancient text of India, in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 6, verse 3, it says, "Absence of all thoughts of the world, which the Bible calls things of the flesh, is said to be the way to blessedness." In other words, your entry into heaven. And in chapter 11, verse 55, it says, "Perform all your duties for the sake of God, dependent on God." In other words, not on human beings, although God may use humans. Stay devoted to God, free from the attachment and free from malice toward all beings. Then you can reach me, God, the ultimate reality. So there is no need to give up your spouse or your family life if you are there, if you have that, or even your livelihood in order to attain God. To attain God consciousness, that divine state of being that allows you into heaven. You just have to be good to your spouse and your family and do your job well. Serve all of these as though you were doing it for God.